Hey there, good evening, fellow protectors. Welcome to the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast. Greg LaBeouf here with you. I got Dustin Dodere with me tonight. Brad's away. So listen, tonight on this episode, we're going to talk about, I titled it, What Are You Looking At? And just to give everyone a bit of a summary before we deep dive this, there's a tremendous amount of time put into developing the physical skills and attributes, obviously, but specifically the physical concept, strategies, tactics for how to defend or protect or preserve life when you're faced with a violent criminal assault. However, many organizations bypass a very, very critical part of training. And no matter how great your physical skill sets get, no matter how developed and sharpened those attributes are for the physical part of confrontation, none of it really is accessible, or very little of it is accessible if your focus fails. And by focus, there's kind of a couple different ways to look at this. Cognitive as well as perceptual focus. And so what I want to deep dive today is how we, in the weaponization process, how we think about, how we train, how we prepare and develop ourselves as well as our clients for the cognitive and perceptual focus part of violence. And I think, just right off the cusp of this, Dustin, you can probably attest to how important this part of it is because there's so many catastrophic fails, so many of the systems that you need to preserve life, protect your family, defend yourself, they just shut down. You know what I mean? The second you kind of blow those fuse, so to speak. If you lose cognitive or perceptual focus or awareness or control, systems, massive systems just shut down. That leaves you infinitely more vulnerable. Would you agree with that kind of initial assessment of this?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like hands down. I think because I think, and you already alluded to this, but so many people mistakenly think that it's like 90% or more about what you're doing physically.
Yeah.
And I would argue it's the exact opposite.
Yeah, 100%. So this is what we're going to dive into tonight. So we're going to cut to the intro. Stick with us. We're going to come back. We're going to unpack this. This is critical information for those protectors out there. Stick with us. Every day I hear more stories of good people being brutally assaulted and murdered by some individual who has a repeat history of violent offenses, drug addiction, and mental health issues, who is free to walk the streets in the same city where I live, work, and where I am raising my two daughters. Well, I'm tired of screaming at the TV, and enough is enough. Throughout history, there have always been men willing to answer the call to the threats against our way of life. Well, today, that threat is right outside our doors, on our streets, in our neighborhoods, on our public transportation system, outside the places we work, and even outside of our children's schools. My new mission is to create and train a group of men that believe in the right to life and value the freedom a man has to protect his life, his family, and his property. I'm Greg LaBeouf. Welcome to the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast. Okay, so before we cut to the intro, we were setting up tonight's topic, which was, what are you looking at? And I titled that, what are you looking at? Because again, a lot of time put into the physical part of the training in terms of like physically, the strategy, tactics, tools for the physical part of violence, which is obviously critically important. But people have to understand that, I guess for us, we use a concept called whole person integrated development, meaning that you cannot train one aspect. There is, and these systems must be integrated. So yes, you have the physical strategies, tactics, and tools, but at the same time, you have to understand that there's the psychology, the physiology, the spirituality, all of it. Everything is connected. If you're really gonna prepare people for violence, which is really just about one thing, which is destruction, and you got to remember that violence, when people are exposed to it for any length of time, it destroys 98% of all people that are exposed to it for any length of time. The trauma is very real, and it takes a whole person integrated development type of approach. So let's break this down and unpack this a little bit, because I want to be specific on the focus part of it. Now, when I talk about focus, for a lot of people, again, it's like, well, what am I talking about? You know what I mean? So there's a perceptual as well as a visual. So let's just break down the perceptual. The perceptual is the ability to hold on to a thought, right? So you focus, obviously, focus is a force multiplier. So perceptually, we have to have the ability to focus in on a certain task, a certain strategy, a certain tactic. Now, obviously, what we're looking for is we want to have the ability to multi-focus. I don't personally believe in you don't really have the ability to focus on more than one thing at a time with any type of real effectiveness, right? We can obviously have multiple thoughts running through our head at the same time, but really what's happening is you're splitting focus. You're having multiple focus. And so there's something that's called a concept called front sight focus, which is again kind of a shooting analogy, but the ability to see the front sights and what are you aiming at? What do you have in your sights right now? So that's front sight focus. Selecting the target, engaging and holding to the target, and then you might have to then quickly move to the next target. So multi-focusing is a very, very powerful thing for warriors. And you can imagine in life and death altercations and confrontations, mass attack weapons, you're talking about different terrain, different environments, different conditions that are mutating and changing. We can't just be singularly focused perceptually. You can't just focus in on one thing. You have to have the ability to, again, using that analogy, the shooting analogy, you got to figure out what's the front sight focus, what are you aiming at right in that moment, and then you're going to have to very rapidly be able to transition or acquire new targets. But the thing with this is when you work perceptual focus, not only does it give you the ability to switch targets very, very rapidly, but when you are actually engaged and locked on a target, you are all in. So I don't know if I want to go as far as saying that you're 100% front focused on this one thing, but you're pretty fucking close. And that's a real interesting task, right? I mean, if you're dealing with something that is a high level threat, the imminent problem, you need to be in the moment. And we could spend, I'm sure, a lot of time just unpacking what it truly means to be in the moment. But, if I ask you how many people you can fight at once, what's your answer going to be?
One.
Yeah, one. You might have 5 guys there. There might be 5 threats, but you can only deal with one at a time. Anytime that you're working a problem, you have to do step 1. And so, I'm not saying that you can't go from 1 to 10 very quickly, but you have to deal with one. But if you're in the moment, the imminent problem, the step 1, the first thing, but you're already thinking about the third thing, you're more prone to make a mistake or not get the job finished or not do it to the best of your ability, whatever it happens to be. So this is kind of my definition of what I'm talking about when I talk about perceptual focus, is the ability twofold. One, to recognize what is mission number 1, what's task 1, and then to put all of your attention onto that. And only when you have kind of completed that mission or solved that problem or completed that task, however you want to phrase that, then you acquire the next target. So that's perceptual focus. So what are you looking at in quotes there, is what are you focused on? And that's very powerful. So I'm just trying to define the two. So would you agree with my definition of perceptual focus? And do you have anything that you want to add to help clarify what we're talking about when it comes to perceptual focus?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The only thing I would add, and not even add, is more just highlight for people, is that when they hear you saying like, "Oh, you're focusing on one thing," I just want to highlight the fact that doing that might be for tens of seconds, it might be for seconds, it might be for fractions of seconds.
Yes.
But that's the point, is like doing something for fractions of seconds, that might be all you're talking about. But for those fractions of seconds, you're solely focused on that one thing. Because I think it's too easy for people to hear what you're saying and just go, well, no, you can't just be thinking about this one thing for 30 seconds. Well, yeah, no, not when there's multiple opponents and mutations and all these different things. So that would be it. Just the time frames can be very, very small or not.
No, it's a great point to clarify, because that's exactly what we're going to talk. That's exactly what I want to unpack. And that is exactly my point. You cannot focus in on one thing solely, really at all, like that, and that becomes the skill set that people are missing, because that's exactly what will happen. And I'm going to introduce a term and what that's called in a few seconds. But so great point to highlight. Now let's just clearly define the second part of this, which is you have perceptual focus and then you have the visual focus. And so, I mean, obviously these systems are interconnected, but I'm actually want to talk about your vision, like your eye, and just for some simple parameters for the context of this discussion, you have hard focus and soft focus. You have your hard focus and you have your peripheral focus, right? So just meaning a hard focus is if I'm looking at something to see the details. So if I just look around the room I'm sitting in right now and I see a picture on the wall that has some smaller writing on it, if I look and I really want to try to see what that, I mean, I already know what it says, but if I didn't, I really wanted to try to see what that smaller writing says, I'm going to hard focus in on it, right? So I'm looking at it and my brain is, my eyes are focusing and, adjusting, and so that I can then make out the print. But when I do that and I get into that hard focus, I become oblivious to everything else in the room. Now, obviously, this is a room I'm very familiar with, so I have a working, very accurate mental blueprint of this room. But when you're out in public and all of a sudden I zero in on something with my hard focus, and you're in an environment that is, maybe even if it's somewhat familiar to you, but you now become oblivious to the other aspects of that environment, such as the terrain, the choke points, the egresses, the different obstructions, and all of the different details that might be in there, as well as the people that are around you. So I just want people to have an idea that when we're talking about visual focus, we're actually talking about what are you actually looking at? Are you engaged in hard focus? Are you engaged in soft focus? And soft focus is the reverse. So soft focus is I'm just kind of peripherally scanning the entire room. So if I just kind of soften my gaze, I'm seeing multiple things at once. I mean, I'm seeing the monitor in front of me. I'm seeing the lights to the side. I'm seeing the computer desk over there. I'm seeing the things that are, on the floor, the chairs, the layouts, the doorways. I'm just taking in a tremendous amount of information. Most of that information is coming to me in the form of shapes and silhouettes. So I'm not seeing the specific details. I can pick up color changes. I can pick up, depth changes and stuff, but it's all through the kind of silhouetting that occurs through the peripheral acuity, right? So again, we're talking tonight about what are you looking at? And so we have the perceptual focus and then we have the visual focus. Now, I think people can see, and I'll get you to put your 2 cents in on the visual part of the focus, but I think people can understand how these systems become interconnected. If I hard focus again on the picture and I hard focus on the writing, well, my perceptual focus decodes that I'm trying to decipher what the writing is. And so my attention kind of joins my visual focus, directs my perceptual focus. Now, I'll just say this. We all know how these two things also can separate. Let's just look at distracted driving. I mean, you can be driving, looking at the road with a soft focus. You're seeing the car in front of you. You're seeing the other cars beside you. You're picking up You're picking up a lot of information, but your brain is busy. So your visual focus is kind of a soft perceptual focus. But your perceptuals, that's your visual focus, your perceptual focus is you're thinking about an incident that happened at work, or you're thinking about a conversation you have with your spouse, hours before, or that you're about to have, or whatever it is. So you're distracted. You're thinking, about different thoughts, even though your vision is pulling in, you're driving. And of course, that can be vice versa. You can hard focus when you're driving and have distracted periphery thoughts running through your head. So I think everyone's had more than enough experiences on how the perceptual focus and the visual focus operate in unison, as well as operate separate or independent from each other. And I think people can draw some conclusions as to how that can, at times those can be advantageous, and many, many, many more times those can lead to quite disastrous results. And so obviously we're going to take this in a few seconds and put it in the context of a violent assault. So just any 2 cents on the visual focus part.
Yeah, you kind of, I think we're about to head there based on what you just said, but the one thing that kind of hit me as you were talking about hard focus versus soft focus and picking things up in your periphery, and right away my head went to like, oh yeah, people can really get themselves in trouble sometimes. And kind of what hit me was like the difference between a scan or a stare, which is kind of like a hard focus, soft focus. Like sometimes all you need is a scan, and people inadvertently use a stare. And then that sometimes can create a situation, it can escalate a situation, and it might be completely unintentional, but it's just to sort of point out that these things are super important, like understanding the difference for many reasons. You know what I mean? So that's just one small example
Yeah.
of how they're different. But
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so if we've kind of set up the context, the framework for our discussion tonight, then let's apply it to our training, or really the training for anyone that wants to not just survive violent encounters, but absolutely thrive in violent encounters. I mean, let's just state what maybe is obvious and maybe not. We define these different types of vision as local vision, which is your hard focus, global vision, which is your periphery type acuity. So local, you're looking for very specific detail. Global, you're taking it all in. And then those two, there's a third type of vision, which is what we call glocal, which is a combination of the two. And that's one of the most important qualities to train when it comes to warriorship, is the ability to go from local to global at will and under control, meaning by design, with intent. And so if you look at this and say, okay, you've got the local, you've got the global, and then you've got this glocal. If we just use any sports analogy, if you look at the best athletes in any sport in the world, one of the things that they always have a very high level of is their focus, perceptual as well as visual. I mean, imagine an NFL receiver, one of the top, just any of the top receivers in the NFL today, and we'll see those guys on a weekly basis. The ball gets snapped, the quarterback falls into the pocket, the receiver takes off running his pattern, and what is he facing? Well, he's facing a very determined opposition that does not want him to catch that ball. And week in and week out, you'll see these guys, the ball is tossed, you'll see these guys jump, extend, literally sacrifice their body to make that catch. And many, many times there's a cost. They get nailed. And I would submit to most people, though, that the reason that you don't have more injuries to these receivers is because they have an extremely, extremely high level of focus. They control what they are looking at, perceptually as well as visually. Imagine for a second when that ball gets snapped, that running back is probably hyper-focused with local vision right off the onset. He's looking for the hole. He's watching the blocker that is directly in front of him. But at the same time, he's still accessing, for just fractions of seconds, the shutter is flipping to where he's taking in the bigger global picture of where other blockers might be. And then the second he maybe makes his deke or his move, then all of a sudden he's, maybe into a slightly more global focus, because as he's running and he's tracking the blockers, he is at the exact same time, he is looking for the receivers, right? So he's watching the quarterback. He's watching to see if the quarterback is aligning with him, if the quarterback is, while in the scramble, making an effort to are we going to complete this pass? Are you going to toss to me? Did I get, all of the different factors? And of course, once that ball's released, that receiver has to take a final snapshot globally, and he has to know where all of the pieces are in relation to him, but he has to start tracking that fucking ball. Because if he's not tracking the ball with a higher level of localized focus, right, then he's not going to make the catch. But at the same time, his brain is assessing, this blocker was X yards away from me, at X angle from me. And so he's doing the math very quickly in his head that when he jumps and extends up to make the catch, he's knows how much time he has to brace himself for the impact. And sometimes that ability to brace for the impact is only psychological, meaning he's fully extended to make the catch, and he knows he's about to get, a contact's about to happen. And they're very, very good at that. They're very accurate at that. The hits in any sport that you don't see coming are the ones that'll get you. That's the ones that lead to injury. In combat, those are the ones that'll kill you. So hopefully, I mean, it's just a stellar example of a human's ability to control not only their perceptual focus, but their visual focus as well. And I don't think I can come up with a better analogy than the one I just offered up. Because now if you turn around and say, imagine the context is not a game of football, but is a life and death altercation with multiple opponents with weapons, all with the intent to murder you or your family. Now you're not talking about blockers trying to tackle you. You're not talking about people trying to intercept the pitch or, the toss. You're talking about, machete slashes. You're talking about blitz attacks. You're talking about leg tackles and punches and just, all kind of bottles flying, all kinds of things. Not to mention where your family's at, where egress is at, terrain changes, expedient weapon accessibility, your weapon accessibility, all of these different types of things. So this should hopefully create a strong sense of urgency to want to understand how to better train and control what you are looking at, your perceptual and your visual focus. So Dustin, anything off? I know you got cut off a little bit on some of what I was saying, but hopefully you got enough to pick up on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not going to try and give another analogy because you just basically said that was the best one.
Well, I mean, you're the analogy guy. You might
Yeah,
come
I
up with
know.
something
I
better,
know.
and I'll
Yeah.
have to eat my words, which I'll gladly do. So, if you think you got one in your back pocket, whip it out, buddy.
No. No, that was fine. That was a good
That
one.
was
I'll give it
fine. That was fine. Okay, well, thank you. From Dustin, that's pretty good. Well, that was okay. You're fine. Okay, so any parts on that you want to talk to, or I'll just push to the next level.
No, keep going. Yeah, for sure. I'm
Okay,
good.
so here's the negative of this. If you do not train for the skill sets that we're talking about, okay, what happens? One of the things that can happen. I'll go through a couple, but one of the main things is when it comes to your. I'm going to give one for each. When it comes to your visual focus, you can experience what is called tunnel vision. And most people, I'll start there because most people are familiar with what tunnel vision is. And tunnel vision is literally when you will start to lose your peripheral acuity. There's a number of reasons why this can start to happen in a combat situation. Physiological escalation, your sympathetic nervous system simply starts to escalate out of control. And again, I'm not going to break down if you're not fully familiar with what the sympathetic nervous system is and the role that it plays, the SNS activation. We all have an optimum. And that means it's not just heart rate like it would be from, going for a run or, doing an anaerobic or aerobic workout or whatever. It is literally your body's innate survival system activating, and it redistributes and remobilizes all of the body's resources to aid in your survival. So most people call it the fight or flight system, which is only half the dichotomy, right? But that's okay for right now. We'll just accept that as a basic understanding. The fight flight starts to happen, and your body can actually get so jacked up that it goes beyond what is called the ozone, the optimal zone of natural excellence. So it's just like, think of like a tier 1 athlete, but they just get in their own head. They get, something happens within the context of their sport, their event, and they start to lose emotional control, therefore physical control, physiological control, and bad things start to cascade out of control. So tunnel vision, you literally can lose your peripheral acuity. You can lose your depth perception. So all of a sudden now, imagine being in a violent situation, 4 or 5 different guys, machetes, families' life's at stake, your life's at stake, and all of a sudden your vision is like looking through a soda straw. I mean, you just literally can only see what you can see through a straw. Well, that's catastrophic. If we lose such control over our physiology that it affects our visual focus like that, then you are at a massive disadvantage, because you can only pull in a soda straw parameter of information. Okay, so visual tunnel vision is one of the visual things that we want to stave off. When it comes to the perceptual focus, there's something called cognitive rubbernecking. And so there's a lot of different studies in all types of different fields about cognitive rubbernecking and stuff. But just to keep the conversation very, very simple, what happens is the brain perception cognitively, you get anchored or fixated on a piece of information. And there's been many, many studies to show how powerfully a negative piece of information or even a negative word can cause cognitive rubbernecking. Now, most people understand the term rubbernecking. You drive by any accident or some guy on the side of the road with a flat tire and fucking traffic grinds to a halt and people are all looking over. There's a car in the ditch and everybody's, all of their focus goes. Everyone wants to see. And of course, the second a few cars slow down and start looking, the fucking next thing you know, 1,000 cars slow down because they're like, well, if people are looking at it, there's got to be something worth looking at. And then everybody starts to they start rubbernecking. Okay, well, cognitive rubbernecking kind of is the same type of thing. So if I give you a combat application, you're out living your life, you got your family, you're hanging out there, you're making your way back from, it's been so nice out lately that, you're coming back from the river or from the lake, you're loading up your car, and all of a sudden you turn around and there's one or two guys standing there and you can't help but notice the giant machete in his hand. And the second you see the machete, your brain becomes fixated on that specific negative piece of information. Now, there's other negative pieces of information. The guy's swearing at you. The guy's, fucking got no fucking neck. He's got scars down his face. I mean, their eyes are pinned, which indicates, potential drug use and stuff. But that machete becomes the focal point. And so as this whole situation progresses forward, no matter what else is said, no matter what else is being done, your brain keeps rubbernecking back to the machete. Is it real? Oh my God, it's a fucking machete. I wonder if that's fucking real. And the brain just gets stuck. And it's like the brain can't refresh. It's like your computer screen, you just get the pinwheel of death. And it's like no matter, other things are happening, things are moving forward, stuff needs to progress, but you're locked on this one piece of information. Now, yes, it can be a very critical piece of information, but the point is that that piece of information has frozen your screen, so to speak. And so now you've lost the perceptual focus, the ability to move, to get the front sight focus and move from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, and especially in the rapid manner that you would need to do that at. So highlighting now what, we're talking about, what are you looking at? Where's your perceptual and visual focus? What are the skill sets you need to develop? Why is that important? Now we're highlighting what some of the negative things are that happen. Now, I'll ask you, Dustin, if you want to add anything to that, that'd be great. But the other side is, because if you've trained in this at the level you have, obviously, and the level that we do with the scenarios and the experiences and stuff that we have through our training, as well as any real world experiences that come with that, I can think of many, many times where I've experienced both of these things. Where I've experienced the horrible effects of tunnel vision, and I've also experienced, that cognitive rubbernecking and just getting stuck, perceptually fixated on something, because it happens. And when you're training hard and you're training real, that is the goal of hard training. Is they are attempting to cause these focus fuck ups, because. Maybe I'll just finish this way. I said this at the beginning of this podcast, which is why this is such an important topic. If I have a guy come into a scenario, I can either be one-dimensional and think, I'm just gonna try to present this guy with the toughest physical challenge. I'm gonna come at this guy full fucking force, man. I'm gonna try it. I'm everything I know. I'm firing my I'm going to bring all the boxing experience. I'm going to swing sticks, knives, bottles. I'm just going to throw everything at this guy physically and see if I can get this guy, see if I can crack the egg. Right? But many, many times I just literally go, okay, it's my turn to feed. Say, listen, hey, do me a favor. And I get one or two guys that are kind of in the background, the extras in the scenario. And I assign them each with one or two simple tasks. One guy, I get him to do something, say something that is a negative perceptual anchor point. And the other guy, I'll get him to do something that I know the guy's going to pick up on visually, a stimulus, something that catches his attention, something that causes the heart rate to go up. Even though neither of these things are a direct threat to him, he doesn't know that. And so what happens is that this guy comes into the scenario, and what I've done, what I have set up, is I've got him perceptually rubbernecking, and I have him visually already starting to hyper focus, move into tunnel vision, lose even just 20 or 30%. Fuck, if I can get a guy to lose 15% of his peripheral acuity, how do you think this aids me as the feeder? Do you think this, how much do you think it helps me succeed in my attack of this guy? Now remember, the goal is never to kill a warrior in training, but the goal is to take warriors, and as they get better, it is to tax them. We need to inoculate them against the effects that we are talking about. And the only way that you can inoculate people against things is by exposing them to things. Right? So having said all that, I want you to kind of throw out your 2 cents worth.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a lot, but just to kind of hit back on some of it, like you started talking about the physiological side of tunnel vision and everything, and I think it's so interesting because the human physiology, to me, it's fascinating because it can be both your greatest ally or your greatest adversary, depending on how well you understand it and how well you know how to control it. So you have something like you explain where when your physiology gets out of control because of, fear or whatever it is, I mean, if you don't understand what's happening, I mean, that alone can get you killed. Because when your vision starts to go, like, panic is going to go through the roof. If you've never truly experienced it, you don't know what it is, you don't know why it's happening. I mean, it's truly catastrophic. Even if you know what it is and you've never trained how to control it, how to start to reverse the effects of it, it can be equally catastrophic. So it's like you have to both understand what it is and then learn and train how to work through it. We've done water confidence courses where it was all about like literally learning to control that physiology, swimming as fast as you can, guys trying to drown you, and then you get a straw and they dunk you underwater and you're trying to breathe through a straw when your cardiovascular system is screaming for oxygen and you can't get enough, and it's like panic is naturally going to set in. But you've spent the time in the pool. You've learned, okay, how do I regulate? I can't get the oxygen that my body is demanding. Too bad. You have to regulate. You can't lose control. So, you do stuff like that, and it's like it'll sort of turbocharge everything. So you learn how to do it, and then in real life, when the situation, when sugar turns to shit, so to speak, you've at least got that experience, that skill set's developed. So now it starts to shift from what could be the adversary to now an ally. And at the same time, it's like that same physiology is also what gives people superhuman strength. So to me, it's just such a fascinating part of just human beings that it's like it warrants a ton of time in study and in training because it is just so detrimental and yet so powerful. On the cognitive rubbernecking thing, it's interesting you brought it up tonight because I just experienced it, well, on the other side of it, last weekend, just training with my son. I think I already told you about this, but for everybody else, he wanted to do some knife sparring. I was like, okay, so we just take a training blade and we're just moving around our training center and just knife sparring. And like instantly I can see this kid is like just completely rubbernecking on the hand that's holding the knife. And I was like, yeah, I get it. Like you don't have as much experience as me. So you see the knife, but right away, like just so much importance is attached to that knife. And it's like, yeah, like it's important, but that piece of information is not more important than any other piece of information that your perceptual system is taking in right now. Because as you said, the punch you don't see coming is the one that hurts the most. So it's like that knife might be in my right hand, but like if you get hit with my left, or if you get kicked, or you get tackled to the ground, like things get a whole lot worse than just that knife in that moment. But you could see him as he was moving around. He's just staring, like just that hard focus on my knife hand. And so I kind of stopped him, like, hey, we got to have a conversation because you have to understand that this goes, well, again, way beyond the physical of what you're doing right now. And here's why. And so I kind of had the same conversation with him. So yeah, like I, again, saw it firsthand from the other side just a few days ago because it comes up all the time in everybody's training. It just is it's a human condition, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, see, I love the example because you also talked about like regulation was a large part of what you were saying, which is so huge because part of how you, like, what are you looking at? Well, part of even giving yourself the opportunity to track multiple things. Use the local vision, the global vision, and actually be really, really world class at global vision, shifting your front sight focus rapidly, but with pure intent, meaning being in the moment and actually being on target with each thing, every single shift. If you lose control of your physiological system, well, then you're going to have catastrophic fail. That's like your whole system. I mean, you got your heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory, your cognitive function. I mean, your motor skills. You got all of these different systems online. Imagine like those are, you got 10 different engines. Well, all those engines are running and revving and driving theoretically in unison. But imagine if 6 out of those 10 engines are all being redlined. And pretty soon, you're going to have some catastrophic fails in 2, 3 of those engines. Well, that's the difference between living and dying. So if you have the ability to regulate, which is what we call the inner control box, where you're using 4 guiding training methodologies, right? You have to be trained and utilizing and developing and working your tactical self-talk, your tactical performance imagery, your cognitive counter-response training, and then you have to understand all of the different myriad of tools that come through tactical arousal control technique. So those four areas build an inner control box, meaning they build like a thermostat. That's what's regulating, the RPM levels, of your systems during a combat application. So that the fight-flight model, which is what most people are talking about or know it as, that's the thermostat, yet most people don't do that work. So again, we can just unpack, and we have many, many times we've talked about this, but what those tools are and how you build out your inner control box. The second part, when you share the story of when you're training with Braxton, is very, very tangible. And that's probably the part that I want to speak to a little bit more tonight. Because in that situation, I think it becomes really, really clear that the knife becomes, in the context of this knife sparring, and you're training that aspect right now, but that knife becomes that kind of negative piece of information, but also it's positive. It's like, okay, he's got a knife, I got a knife, and I want to, defend this. I want to cut the hand, right? So of course he's focused on it both in a positive manner because that becomes his objective. That's the mission, get the hand. But at the same time, he's also like, fuck, that guy's got a knife. He's better than me, bigger than me. You know what I mean? Like he also wants to try to get my hand. So all of a sudden, though, you see this singularity of like the mission parameters. And so if you really look back at it, like you said, what are all the other things that are not being thought of? And it's not just it's not only your, hey, you're watching the knife in my right hand, but I'm about to, your hands are down. I'm going to crank you with my left hand. I'm going to kick you. I'm going to, whatever, all of the different myriad of things you can do. But when you're also looking at that hand, you get sucked into a different perception of range, right? So you're managing the distance in a very different manner, in a singular manner. So spatial awareness is lost. In the same context of that, because I've done it with them too. I know how this is going, but all of a sudden you're losing the greater context of the environment. Now when you're training and you say let's train this, you're not looking for the egress because the context is not to run out of the room. Yeah, but at the same time, we know that when you're training, you're always looking for the egress. Even if you have no intention of using it, because that's one of the layers of front focus development. Like that's how you train your vision. That's how you're training your local, global, and making it global. That when you and I are training, or anyone that we're training with, we might have a nice open space. But when we're moving around, we literally create obstacles or obstructions in that environment, even though none really exist. I will all of a sudden tax myself by mentally, all of a sudden there's a tree there, there's a car there, there's a wall of people there I can't get through. All of a sudden, we're in a 40 by 40 foot area with lots of space, and all of a sudden I confine myself to a 6 by 6 foot space, like as if I'm in an elevator or a narrow passageway or something. And the other guy has no idea what I'm doing. All of a sudden, my behavior patterns completely change. My footwork changes, my angulation changes, my presentation changes. And yet the guys that train with us, they all of a sudden, they understand what I just did. And sometimes they try to use, he can't move. He's imaging something beside him, behind him, and they'll use that and they try to gain a tactical advantage. And of course, many, many times we actually we're putting real world props in. But the thing with this is if you don't have a framework, because again, your brain has to, it's like, well, it's strategies. Strategies mean priorities. So to me, it's like another fine analogy. Hopefully, it's a fine analogy. If you can come up with better, you can absolutely do it.
I got faith in you.
Yeah, yeah. But we train a couple of pilots, and they always have a pre-flight checklist. And it doesn't matter if they're a pilot for a couple of years or they're a pilot for 30 years. There's always a pre-flight checklist. They're always checking out the plane. Now, why do we think they do that? Well, because obviously it's fucking important to make sure that all systems are go. Because once you're up, you don't want a problem. But what I'm getting at is even if and when there is some sort of a malfunction, there is a problem. The second that happens, it's like, so you do your pre-flight check. Now you're up in the air and all of a sudden an engine catches fire or the engine starts to stall out. Well, in their brain, another checklist opens up. And they start, so guess what's happening? Perceptually, they start running the checklist. So what's the first thing you do? And depending on the problem, but maybe it's shut down the engine. Maybe it's try to restart I don't know the checklist, I don't know what the thing is, but the point is they actually have this kind of list. And what do we think that does? Now, that list connects to what you talked about. They have to regulate. They might have all that information, but if their heart rate goes up, if they all of a sudden get the tunnel vision, they get vasoconstriction, they can't feel their hands, their feet, they got dry mouth, everything's starting to shut down. You know what I mean? All of the different physiological things that can happen when you get over aroused in a critical incident, it doesn't matter what checklist they have because they've lost control of the human system. But if they can regulate the human system, they still need now, they still have to have the checklist for like, okay, where do I put my focus? What's step one? And start working that procedure. And that's what keeps them, that's what keeps their vision from going into tunnel vision. That's what keeps them from getting caught in the cognitive rubbernecking is they simply start going work the problem. First, second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever it is. Sometimes you got to rinse and repeat right back to one. And oftentimes when you do that, like that'll lead you to a different checklist to go, okay, no, this is not like this didn't work, but now I've discovered something. Now I've diagnosed something different. And so now I'm going to prescribe this and go to that. So in the context of violence, what we're talking about, many people don't know what those checklists are, which is kind of what I want to share with people. So like for me now there's a lot, like these checklists have a lot of things on them and context determines the content. So it's going to be very difficult for me to sit here and give you every checklist that we train to become second nature in people. But a couple that are on some of the major checklists that I can say is probably one of the most important things that people lose control of first is the spatial awareness. They lose total control of range. And if you say, okay, well, what do you mean they lose control of range? And again, great example for when you shared what you're doing with Braxton. If even in an isolated situation where you say, okay, let's work the knife fighting, and you're just doing that for attribute development, right? Yes, there's skill sets that transfer into actual knife defense, but you're building attributes with them, correct? So. Yep. You're using that because the timing, the hand-eye coordination, the placement accuracy, the makes the body mechanics better. There's all these different things. The footwork becomes more crisp and all that type of stuff. But when you're doing this, you can't. The first concern is not the knife. Not in the way people think. The first concern for me is the distance. If I control the range, remember, whoever controls the range controls what can and cannot happen in that situation. If a guy has a knife and I control the range. And every time that he tries to bridge into the range where his knife can slash or stab me, I could snap my fingers and he automatically got pushed back out of range. That knife is fucking useless. Like, it's fucking useless. So for me, one of the biggest things that I'm always looking to control is the range. But just saying the range is so oversimplistic. If you want to control the range, what other things do you have to control? And this is where people might have a different list if you're a sport fighter, if you're a combat athlete or a martial artist. Most people, when they want to control the range, they just think of, well, their footwork. But they think of the footwork in terms of being evasive. So a kicker is going to stand at kicking range, a puncher's at punching range. And there's this bias pre-programmed because your art is done out of a range, 1 or 2 ranges or 3 or 4 ranges, but you're have been taught to fight out of this range. But for me, the range, yes, you need footwork to control range, but the things that make controlling range much easier is I am always looking for first egress. I'm looking for choke points. I'm looking for terrain. I'm looking for cover versus concealment. I'm looking for things that build disconnect or achieve disconnects. I'm looking for the geometric angles off the walls, off the corners, off tables, off cars, off trees, off all these different things. I mean, that's a list of 4 or 5 things that if I am, again, so let me just make sure it's connected directly. My vision is predominantly going to go to global, because I'm going to be sweeping my eyes at a low 45 right left and moving and angling my body so that I am taking in the snapshot of my environmental surroundings. Because if I'm aware of where all of these different things are, then I can utilize those things to control range. And they allow me to control range at a much, much higher rate of success and with much, much more ease. Does that kind of make sense?
Oh, yeah.
And so most people, their focus goes to the knife fight. Okay, get your knife ready, his knife's ready, you're moving around. You're already looking for the exchange. But why? Because your perception and your visual focus have no other training beyond that. So it's one-dimensional. So all you can do is engage in the knife fight. So yeah, but that's what you're doing, you're knife fighting. Yeah, but all training, what's the end goal? The end goal is to be better in combat. The end goal is not to be a better knife fighter. The end goal is to be better in combat, like ultimate, violence. So I don't know. Hopefully, we're painting a picture here of the importance of training your perceptual and visual, focus. And again, what are you looking at? And my big goal is to show people that there's layers to this stuff. And if anything, it's you want people to start exploring this topic, exploring this area of training, and asking more questions, right? We can't do it in a podcast. I can't train you in a podcast. I can educate you and our whole goal is to create awareness, right? Because control can only ever follow awareness. I don't know, so anything that you want to add in off that?
No, I think just to your very last point, I think that's exactly it. We're just trying to create a desire in people to want to seek out the answers.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's just like, this is a thing. This exists. This is part of the problem. And it's like, well, we can show you the solution, but not right now. But yeah, so yeah. I think that's what it is. It's just trying to make people aware of that these things are even a part of combat and survival and everything else.
Yeah. I think maybe the best thing I can do, I don't know if my mic's cracking a bit or not, if you can hear
it. Just started.
Okay, so let's see if we can get through this here before I wrap it up. If not, I'll have to reset my mic. Oh yeah, it's definitely cracking a bit. I can hear it, right? So actually, just let me reset real quick. Dustin will entertain you with a powerful story, I'm sure.
Perfect.
Okay.
Much
right.
better.
Did we have that story? I'm sorry I missed it. You'll have to repeat it later.
It was very brief, very quick.
Well, I reset quicker than I thought. I thought I'd give you more time, but I think what I want to share with people is an experience that I had on this and why this is just very, very powerful for me. Early in my training, this was a part of training, obviously. Training the perceptual focus and the visual focus. But I ended up finding myself in a situation. It wasn't directed at me. It was a situation where other people were being targeted. I interjected into that because I had the training, I had the skill sets, and that's my core beliefs as a man. But I got very lucky because this was a situation where there was three guys. The situation, I'm not getting all the details, but the situation, it ends up going tactical. And I remember I knew where everybody was at. I engaged with one of the guys. Well, he engaged with me actually, but I was dealing with this response and I was dealing with him. And of course, that just took, I just have Kodak memories, Kodak moments, like snapshots. But I remember that all of a sudden when I was dealing with this individual, I was just completely oblivious to anything and everything. I mean, it was like we got, we were in this like a real world environment, you know what I mean? And all of a sudden it was like my memory of it is I can see every detail about him. Every detail. I mean, like I can see the stubble on his face. Like I feel like I could it's freeze framed. Like it's a Kodak picture and I could zoom in and see every piece of stubble on his face, the button. I can remember the buttons on his jacket, like the fraying of his jeans, like just the craziest detail. But it completely feels like we're on a green screen. Like I can't even in my memory, I can't see anything. I don't know the terrain. I don't know where the other people were, none of that. And then it's like everything goes fast and then it's like another picture. And fortunately for me in this, I'm like, he's receiving damage, so it's going well for me in that situation. But about three kind of Kodak photos in, so there's gaps in the memory. I have this clear feeling, like in the still image that I can see in my brain, where I'm doing what I need to be doing. I'm putting this guy down. I am like, there's a level of panic in me, and my brain is like, my inner dialogue is screaming, where are the other two? And again, it's like it's a green screen. It's like it's hollow. And then, sadly, the image after that is not a picture, but a feeling of the hit that came from behind. It's the other guys all of a sudden, they nailed me. And then everything is like a wave, you're up on this wave and all of a sudden the wave collapses on you and now you're under the wave. And it was just this swirl of anarchy and chaos. And luckily, I mean, it didn't last, it's kind of like, again, being caught under the wave for a minute or 90 seconds. And then all of a sudden it was, they were gone. And, you have that kind of, you pick yourself up and you're kind of like, all the coral rash and you get a fucking mouthful of sand and but I was alive. And so I remember that sat with me for a long time because the feeling I had after that was that I couldn't break the contact with this guy. I couldn't look away. I couldn't scan. I had no awareness of my surround. Like it all just became sterile and it all became tunnel visioned. And no matter how much I tried, I didn't have control over my senses. And so I remember going back and talking about this, with Paul and Tom Ron, and really, really working this. And again, it came down to this conversation of what are you looking at? The training that you need to put more effort, more awareness into your training of your perceptual acuity and your visual acuity and your visual controls and focus. And so it just became, I just started integrating it with conscious intent into every single thing that I did. And I started working a ton of mass tac, ton of the scenarios, ton of like just really scanning and I started training my visual, my peripheral acuity and my perceptual acuity for the first time with real earnest, right? Because people can tell you things, people can offer you opportunities, but they can't force you to understand and prioritize it the way that it deserves to be. And so for probably 2-3 years, maybe even 4 years, there's not a training thing I did that didn't have some aspect that it forced me to be able to focus, to scan, to pick things up, to control my focus, my vision, and my perceptual acuity. And then a number of years later, after that, another incident that I was involved in, again, multiple opponents, different, and far more dangerous circumstances, and 4 guys. And the second that this ended up going tactical, and again, I wasn't the direct participant in this, in the sense that it was coming to the aid of other people. But in that one, it was a completely different experience. I was, using the local, I was global, using the local focus, going back to global. I was tracking all 4 guys. I was able to move, disengage, re-engage, disconnect, reconnect, scan the environment, use the environment. I mean, it was textbook. And it was infinitely easier than what I'd been doing in my training. And in that situation, out of the 4 guys, 2 ended up turn tail and run because they couldn't even engage, because they couldn't gain access. And then the other 2 attempted to engage and paid a price for it. And it was much, much easier to do. And so people could tell me that, well, yeah, but that was 4 more years or 5 more years of you training physically, so you were better. And I will tell you inside out that, like, yes, that's true, but it had nothing to do with my physical skills. Isn't what shut that down, isn't what allowed me to survive, isn't what allowed me to protect other people and myself. It was the fact that they didn't control the playing field. They couldn't gain angles. They weren't fighting off at geometric angles. They couldn't gain access to the angles that they needed. They could not, they had the initiative because they started this whole thing, but they couldn't maintain the initiative because they simply couldn't control the dynamics of what was happening. And that was solely because they were not able to get me perceptually rubbernecking, and I never experienced, not only did I not experience the tunnel vision, it was heightened perceptual acuity, visual acuity, peripheral acuity. And it's you know what I mean? It was, again, and the only thing I could think of is, it's like a running back, it's like a receiver that is getting around all the blocks. And they're just finding the fucking holes. And then all of a sudden your quarterback puts that ball right in one of those holes. And most times the quarterback is putting that ball to where he knows you're going to be, and you're just, and you make that catch, and when you make that catch, you've got space. And when you give those guys space, they're going to do damage. And that's what it felt like. And so, that I'm grateful for having that contrasted experience, right? And I've experienced the cognitive narrowing and the tunnel vision and stuff. I've experienced that tons of times in training, because the people that I train with, such as yourself, are good enough to challenge me, tax me, and to bring it out. But that's the thing. You don't get perfect. You don't get fail proof, but you get really fucking good. Like the levels get higher and higher. It's kind of like the William Hoff thing. You know what I mean? That guy, cold water to that guy, or the cold to that guy, is a different fucking level than it is to me or you. Mm-hmm. And you can, for sure, you can do cold showers and cold plunge all you want. That motherfucker's on a different level. Well, how did he get there? Well, he worked. He worked the fucking process, and he built that motherfucker. Right? And so the more you train this, the more you become inoculated to it. It doesn't mean you can't experience it, but the level that it takes for that to happen to you is beyond what most experiences can ever push you to. And that's what we're trying to go for, right? So that's the power of this type of training process. And again, I know it, as certain as I'm sitting here, that the physical skill it's one of the greatest regulators on it. If you don't have this perceptual and visual, if you can't control what you're fucking looking at, perceptually or visually, you can just shut people down physically, very, very quickly, and with very, very little effort, right? So because they're their own worst enemy. You just turn the human system against them, and you can't fight that. You can't will your way through that. You can't try harder through it. It just doesn't work that way, right? So anyway, so maybe that's a good thing, Dan. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I agree. It essentially, like when it's built into your training methods, it literally just changes behaviors. It just becomes a part of your normal operating procedures. Whether that's just walking through life or whether that's in something that's an actual altercation or a violent
Yeah.
criminal situation is like it just becomes part of the behavior patterns. The motor programs, it's all built in. You look at like scenario training as feeders, like we've spent hundreds, if not thousands, of hours feeding scenarios for people. And is like one of the most important things when there's multiple people in a room and there's the one good guy coming through. There's not many things that are predetermined in our scenarios, but one of them typically is like, well, there's going to be one aggressor or two aggressors or five aggressors, but typically the number is pre-chosen
Yeah.
before the scenario starts. A lot of other stuff just happens, but the one variable is like whether or not that person is scanning. I mean, I remember being on the good guy side of it in the very beginning and making that mistake, much like your story. You forget to scan. It's a hard lesson in the moment, but it's a much needed lesson, and you never make that mistake again.
Yeah.
You eat a couple hard shots from behind that you didn't see coming, and it's like, and now you're down, and now things are much worse. You got to fight your way back up and get out and egress. But again, you make that mistake once. It's a hard lesson, but
Yeah.
but then as feeders, and a scenario might start with one aggressor, let's say, but if the good guy engages, if that's what the scenario requires, and that every other person in that room, even though they're not supposed to engage, they're checking, they're watching. And if that guy's not scanning, now there's two or three or four or seven aggressors. Because again, if you don't teach that lesson in a controlled way, but if you don't teach it, you don't tax that guy a little bit, he'll make that same mistake in real life and he's dead potentially. So you owe it to him and his family to teach him that lesson. But it's like, again, it becomes part of the culture, and then it becomes part of the behaviors, and it becomes automatic. And I think that's the best part of it. But it has to be built into the training. It's once you're aware of it, you talk about it. It's like, but then you got to actually integrate it, right?
Yeah. Well, what you're talking about too is the standard. And what's the standard? Well, what are you training for? What's the overarching mission? And that is surviving violent altercations when you're outgunned, outmanned, bigger, stronger people who have the intent to murder you and your family, have no value for life. Like that's the standard. So like you said, when you're in that, this is a skill set that you can't ignore. If people are becoming tunnel visioned or people become singularly focused and people stop scanning, it doesn't matter what the context is. Things have to change to make sure that behavior is never accepted. You have to have the ability to scan. You have to have the ability to multi-focus. You have to develop the powerful force multiplying effect of front sight focus and then switching quick to new targets and just all of that stuff that we've been talking about for the last hour. So it's very, very powerful part of the process. And at the end of the day, it's so easy to teach people right from the beginning because it's just
Yeah.
it's the way that it is. Like, it's the one thing that's so interesting about all of this is that when people come in with zero experience, what most of our guys do, because they're good men, they work hard, they're busy working, and now they're realizing that this providing is not enough, and so they come with zero experience, and our goal is to take them from zero to formidable in the most expedient manner possible. But when they have no experience, it's then they don't know what you should do or shouldn't do. Like it's that story with that kid. One of his buddies falls through the fucking ice, or his younger brother falls through the ice, and it's like 6 inches of ice, and he grabs this little tiny tree branch off the tree, and he starts smashing the ice, and he breaks a hole through the ice and pulls his brother out, and everybody shows up, and the firefighter's like, "How the fuck did you do this? That's not possible." With a tree branch, it would take us, like, you're a kid. We had trouble getting through with a fucking axe, but there was nobody there to tell him that he couldn't do it. Like, when you don't know if something should be hard or not, it's just, we just present this shit as normal because this is the way you train. So we're always taxing focus. We're always right from the day inoculating them against tunnel vision and cognitive rubbernecking. And so very quickly, this is just normal for people. And they have that skill set. And it's a massive skill set that'll save your life. But so many people are, it's like, again, there's so many people walking around that are vitamin deficient. So many different things, nutritionally deficient. And it's like, you just no. This is one of the things that you have to have as a core skill set, right? So whole person integrated development. This is a massive pillar of that. So, okay, we'll finish it here then. Let's wrap it up here for tonight. Yeah, I think that's everything. So that was good. Any final thoughts?
No, that's good.
Okay, that's where we're going to leave it. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thanks for joining us. Again, we just appreciate the support, but that is it. Yeah, I was going to make a quick mention at the top of it. I didn't. I'll just say it for those that might be still hanging on here at the end again. But just a week ago or two here in Edmonton, there's another two girls stabbed, teen girls, 113, 117, stabbed by 28-year-old guy, repeat offender who just a couple years previous had stabbed another two people, still out on our streets. This mission just, you just wake up every day and you keep trying to weaponize more and more good people. And, it's not going to get better. People know this. More and more men are waking up and understanding that it's not going to get better. It's going to get worse before it gets fucking better. Our justice system can't even fucking figure out who to keep in jail and who to release. And it's just no reason for these repeat offenders to be out, but they're out there. They're out there in far bigger and greater numbers than most people understand. Most people just do not get the critical mass level that we are at. And so I would just say to anybody that is still listening to this, that follows us, listens, trains with us, is thinking about training with us, fuck man, after's too late. We just need more and more good weaponized men around because this shit is happening fucking everywhere. And there's just not enough good men around. Police aren't going to solve this. The justice system's not going to solve this. We need people with the fucking training so that when these dark critical moments happen, we have life-saving forces there that can do what needs to be fucking done. So, anyways, there's not much more I can say about that. Just another fucking example, another great loss to us. So, anyways, that's it, everybody. Please stay safe, stay weaponized. We will chat again soon. Take care.